Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to Fundación Telefónica for having us here today. I wanted to welcome you from the publishing house. I am Karma Riviera from Alfaguara, and this is a very special occasion to have here with us Miss Elizabeth Strout. We were waiting for her for a long time, and she just arrived from Malaga. It has been a full success, and today has also been a great success, and next week she will also be in other regions of the country, and the tickets are already sold out. You all know her work. She has managed something that is not common. Her works have been acclaimed by the critics, and she has won several awards. She has been shortlisted for the Man Booker, but she's also a best-selling author, and she has also found great success among the media, and especially she's a loved author by very well-respected authors at an international level. Her works cover already around 12 books, and they encompass or deal with the state of Maine and the area around New York. We could almost draw an imaginary map of the area, a map of lives intertwined with characters that have their lives cross-cutting, with lives that with characters that met and get separated. And she has a very particular look on all these characters. She has a look that is full of empathy and very sensitive, and she provides something that is very much needed nowadays. She has this look that into the details of the awkwardness, into the small details that might be ignored normally. An encounter that might not seem important, but that under her look and with the wonderful literature tools that she displays, manages to display all these little things that are scattered in the lives of these characters that have created a very particular geography for us all of her readers. William Burgess, Olive Kitteridge, and many other characters that we're going to discuss here today, because Tell Me Everything is a novel about lives intertwined, and we are very lucky to have here also Ángeles González-Sinde. She has a movie director. She has also been the Minister of Culture in our country, and I wanted to thank her for being with us here today, and obviously thank you to Elizabeth Strout for being with us. And at the end of this conversation, you will have the author signing books at the entrance.
Hola, buenas tardes. Gracias a todos.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us here today. Thank you for all of you behind us. Thank you for joining us with in this rainy afternoon. I think that this occasion really deserves your presence here today. By all of Elizabeth Strout's readers, know that this is a really worthy moment. We are very honored of having her here today and to be able to ask her questions in person, and of course of having her new novel where Lucy Barton and Olive Kitteridge meet and join forces or get together. And despite the fact that neither of them is actually the main protagonist of this novel, because the novel, and this is very well stated in the first lines of this novel, that this is a story about Bob Burgess, who is a character that is reappearing in Lucy by the Sea. He's a secondary character in that novel, but he had already been the protagonist of another novel years before, the Burgess Boys, the story of the Burgess Boys, which is a novel from 2013. The universe of Olive Kitteridge is the universe of Maine, whereas Lucy Barton is mainly in New York and also in Illinois, where her hometown is. And these two worlds sort of meet after almost 10 novels that Elizabeth Strout has written and published. and they get together and tell me everything. So this is what we are hoping for today, for Elizabeth to tell us everything. She was born in Maine. She is the daughter to a teacher and also a specialist in parasites. And this is also the profession of William, the first and maybe third husband of... maybe when you remarry a person, I suppose that this is a third husband. And so William is also a specialist in parasites, and Elizabeth has given him the same profession as her dad's. She studied English literature. She then had her degree in law, and she also earned a degree in gerontology. And I wonder to what extent this has been useful to have studied gerontology and law for writing your novels.
Well, it turned out that it was useful. Sorry. I'm just going to take this off. Anyway, I think it turned out that it was useful, but I didn't want to go to law school. It was just nobody was interested in my work, my writing work, so I went to law school. But the point is, when I was there, I did study gerontology, and I think it's because I grew up on a dirt road with many of my great aunts living on that road. There weren't kids around, but there were these great aunts that I had, and they were very depressed, very Maine, very dry, and they would sit around and talk with each other about their dead husband's last meal. That was like their favorite conversation. They would always come back to, oh, I'm so glad Frank had the potatoes the way he wanted them. So I, being a child, I think later on I figured out I probably felt a little responsible, the way kids always feel responsible. Anyway, I was always interested in older people, always. So when I went back to law school after dropping out, I thought, I'm going to get a gerontology degree to go with it, to do elderly law, which I never did.
Y nunca ejerció el derecho.
And you never practiced law?
Oh, yeah, I did. I practiced for 6 months.
Okay.
I was so bad. I was absolutely terrible. Really.
Y entonces es cuando sepa.
So this is when you moved to teaching.
Yes, and thank goodness the law degree counted as a graduate degree, and at that point I'd had 2 or 3 stories published in small publications, and the English chairman of the department at Manhattan Community College liked those stories, and he said, well, you have a graduate degree, you can come teach English. And I loved teaching at that college. For 13 years I did that.
Y mientras...
Well, you were a teacher during all these 13 years. You were writing, but you were not publishing. And you didn't publish Amy and Isabel until a few years later when you were 42. So how were these years where you were learning to become a writer until you finally had your first book published? How did you not give up until then?
I don't really know. I don't know how I didn't give up. I knew that I was a writer from a very young age. I knew I was a writer. And then I was surprised, I will be honest, I was a little surprised that nobody cared about my work. As I got older, I kept thinking, one rejection after another, constantly. And then as I got older, I was really kind of worried about it. But I did notice that every story I wrote was a tiny bit better than the story I had written before. And so that was hopeful for me. But then I did get kind of worn down. And I think that with Amy and Isabel, which turned into my first book, I think that at that point, I look back and I realized until then I had been sort of trying to write like a writer instead of realizing, oh no, I just have to say it. Because at that point I was sort of just worn down enough, I thought, oh, just say it. It'll never get published, nobody will read it, just say it. And then I realized, oh, this is how I write. But I was not young.
I've also heard that you took up a stand-up comedian course. And that was helpful. Could you share that with us? In what way it was, or was it, maybe it wasn't, maybe it was just
No, it was
entertaining?
very helpful. It was very helpful, but it was so frightening. It was one of the most frightening things I did, was to take that stand-up comedy class. I did it because when we moved to New York, I became interested in comedy. We used to go to the comic clubs around. And what I noticed was that people laughed at something that was true. And I thought, I wonder what would come out of my mouth if I was forced up there to say something truthful. Because I had a sense that there was something in my work that wasn't truthful. So I enrolled in a stand-up comedy class at the new school. The class itself was terrifying. Every week somebody dropped out. And those of us that made it through had to perform at a real comedy club for our final exam. And I did. I didn't let anybody I know come. And it was so scary. But as I started, there was a man in the darkness who laughed. And I felt, what I felt was amazing. And then everybody started to laugh after that. So it was a success. And then the whole point of this is that I realized I had been making fun of myself for being an uptight white woman from New England. And really and truly, until I did that class, I didn't even know that I was an uptight white woman from New England. That's how white I was. That's how New England I was. That's how uptight I was. So then I learned. And then I realized, okay, now I'll write about an uptight white woman from New England. Isabel Goodrow, she's not me, but she's uptight. She's white, she's from New England.
También he leído.
I've also read that you play the piano, and that you have played the piano in bars and hotels and different places, and that this, I wonder, does it have anything to do with your sense of rhythm? Because when you write, those of us who are your readers, we know that some of the paragraphs are sort of separated by certain line breaks that you choose, and that give you sort of a pause, a sort of silence, and that you realize that the silence is as important graphically as it is internally. Does it have to do with your musical training and with this tempo that you have because you've been performing in front of an audience to tell the story with the music in front of a live audience?
I think it does have a lot to do with it, yes, because I was playing the piano from a young age, and then I studied with a classical pianist who had retired, but and I think of him so often when I write, because I think of him, he would get very worked up, he was quite intense, and he would get very worked up, and he'd say, can't you hear it, can't you hear it? Now I can hear what he was talking about. Now I think, oh yes, I hear that two-note phrase, poor Irving, you've long dead. But the point is, he was a very good teacher, and I realized every single note mattered. The way you pushed it down, the way you put your hand up, it all mattered, and every single word matters. And I am very conscious as I write to see how the words fall on the ear of the reader.
Es una escritura también.
It's a sort of a writing, it's a type of writing that also seeks a natural style, a way of reproducing in a natural way the character's speech, the way the characters speak without using any slang or anything that sounds artificial, but the way that Olive Kitteridge, for instance, the expressions that he uses, I understand that this is sort of your great aunt's sort of language.
It was. That is a little bit how they sounded. Although none of them were. One of them was named Olive. The sweet one was named Olive, actually. Isn't that funny? But anyway, but there is that cadence, and there is, I think, in some ways, maybe a New England cadence at the back of my mind. But how a person speaks on a page is very different from how we speak in real life. And so as a writer, I have to make sure I get it down the right way for every character that's speaking, to make sure it's actually their voice on the page.
También leo.
I also heard you say that for you, style is very important, that until you find that style, the form of that new novel, you cannot start it. For instance, Olive Kitteridge are tales where characters come again and again, and the addition of all these characters really make the story, but there's not a plot as such. There are some stories that are written in the first person, some in the third person with an omniscient narrator, and there's a narrator that talks to us in the plural, and that also talks to us in a second person and talks of itself in as a plural. For instance, I will explain to you in case you have not, if you have forgotten what has happened to this character. So how do you decide what style is best suited for your story?
Yeah, that's a very important part of it, because like you said, I can't get it down until I have figured that out. And with this book, this is a different kind of narrator for me. This is a much broader narrator that is, I hope, very inclusive to the reader, so that the reader, I hope, feels like the narrator is saying, okay, literally come with me and I'll show you this. And my first reader, who has always been my only reader, Kathy Chamberlain, when I gave her a few scenes from this book at the beginning, she said to me, I think you're going to need a larger narrator. And I realized, oh, of course, she's right. So she's responsible for my realizing, oh, I have to start again and back up and take a really very large narrator that's also intimate.
Le gustan mucho.
You like flowers a lot, don't you?
Una de las cosas.
One of the things that I have experienced when I was reading Tell Me Everything, with all your books, because I find botanics is important in your books, but and the trees, the flowers, nature is important, but in this one, in this novel, we see flowers even in New York, even in Brooklyn. So you're reading and you need to look up in the telephone. I don't know the names of the flowers, so you need to look them up. I continuously search for them in my mobile, because you are creating this universe where all the details, no matter how tiny they are, details in your literature sort of give you a position, a stand in front of life.
Yes, and I just have to tell you, my mother knew flowers. She knew all the names. We lived out in the woods when I was a child, and she knew all the names of the wildflowers, and I would spend so many hours by myself in the woods alone, and every little wildflower I knew the name of because of my mother, and it was so exciting to find one and realize, oh, I know what you are. And that's one of the reasons. She knew about trees, she knew all of that stuff, and because I had so many young years in the woods by myself, I loved it. It was very magical, and I think it's part of my work.
¿Cree usted?
Do you believe, as Bob Burgess's wife says, that artists have some sort of childish attitude to them?
No. That's just
just a cliche.
That's Margaret. I thought, Margaret will think that.
¿Queréis que nos lea?
Would you like her to read some of her novels?
Okay. This will be 3 minutes, so don't get nervous. Okay. And it's not from the beginning, but it's a little ways in. Don't worry about it. Okay. There are many back roads in Maine, meaning many tarred roads with trees reaching overhead from both sides, and the roads themselves are often filled with bumps from the long winters of freezing and then thawing. These roads wind around from one small town to another, and if you're not familiar with them, it's easy enough to get lost. But most of the people who are on these curving back roads know exactly where they are going, and in November there can be a stark beauty as you drive along these places because the trees are bare and the trunks and the branches of these trees stand out against the sky, and if the sun is out, it can sink with a sharp display of yellow on the deep blue horizon. It might be fair to say that people who have lived there for years take this beauty internally. It enters them without their fully knowing it, but it is there. It is a part of the landscape of their lives. 2 weeks after Lucy visited with Olive Kittredge, this happened. On one of these back roads, a man named Matthew Beach lived with his mother. This was in the town of Shirley Falls. Matthew Beach's mother, Gloria Beach, was 86 years old, and she had been living with her son for 10 years. They lived far down a narrow road with no other houses in sight. This was the house that Matthew had grown up in and had lived in his whole life. One Friday evening, Matthew drove to the grocery store, and when he got back, his mother, Gloria Beach, had disappeared from their home. This was toward the beginning of November, and a small bit of the foliage was still clinging to the trees. Matt had called the police right away, and there had been a search with the state troopers and their very bright flashlights. The woods of mostly pine trees and cedars around the house had been examined in a 5-mile radius, and there was no sight or sign of her. Naturally, this was in the newspapers. Bob Burgess and his twin sister, Susan Olson, had spoken to each other about it on the telephone. "Bitch ball disappearing," Susan said. "I didn't even know she was still alive." Gloria Beach and her family had lived in Shirley Falls for years, and the middle child, a girl named Diana, had been in Bob and Susan's class at school. The newspaper said that Walter Beach, Gloria's husband, had divorced her many years before, and he had been deceased for many years as well. Also in the newspaper, for reasons no one quite understood, were 3 current photographs of the children, all grown up now: Thomas, Diana, and Matthew. Thomas was a psychiatrist in Oregon. His photograph showed a sturdy face and kind eyes, yet sort of cold if you really looked. And Diana lived in Connecticut and had been a high school guidance counselor her whole adult life. In the apparently current photograph, she looked beautiful. People did comment on that. She had been a pretty girl, but now that she was older, she still looked attractive. How had that happened? One woman in town suggested that she had had plastic surgery, and Susan Olson, peering at the photograph, realized that was possibly and probably it. The photograph of Matt, who had been living with his mother, was disturbing. He looked frightened and unkempt, and his hair was half over his eyes, which were covered by huge black-framed glasses. "If he killed her, I don't blame him," Susan said to Bob. Bitchball had worked in the school cafeteria. Everyone had been terrified of her. Everyone. Anyway, the case soon went cold.
When did you get this idea of writing novels about a community, about the relationships, changing so much about the viewpoint within the very same community, the same individuals?
Oh, I think with Amy and Isabel, because that was a community, and I learned with Amy and Isabel to back up the camera and sort of take a look at the whole town, and then zoom the camera down in, go into Isabel's head for a little bit, zoom the camera back out, zoom it back in, go into Amy's head, or the office women that just briefly, and then zoom it back out. So that's when I became able to do that.
So
no, it wasn't plan. I don't plan anything. No, let's make that clear. No plan. No.
So it's not a plan, but it is very important in all your novels, this idea of community, and also the fractures within this community, the invisibility of poverty, for instance, or the solidarity as well, and the difficulty and the need of these connections, and how lost can someone feel within their own lives, and sometimes it's very difficult to solve the mystery of the other persons and who the other person is, and also the consolation of being heard, being listened to, and being seen. Because this is why the novel has this title, Tell Me Everything. This is what Olive Kitteridge tells Lucy Barton when she tells her, I came here to tell you a story. Do you want me to tell you a story? And she says, yes, tell me everything. Is it important to tell each other stories?
Well, I'm a writer, so I think stories are essential. I mean, whether we tell them to each other or read them, I think stories are unbelievably important, just because, okay, let me just say that the reason that I'm a writer, and I've always known that I was a writer, is because I understood at a young age that we're only going to see things through our own point of view. As long as we're on Earth, we only see things through our own two eyes. And when I realized that, I was very upset, because I will never know what it's like to be in your head, and you will never know what it's like to be in mine. And that was so frustrating for me. And then as I began to read books at a young age, I realized, oh, books are a place that we get to understand what it's like to be in somebody else's head. And I was so excited by that. And I realized, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and go into other people's heads and then give it to you, the readers, so that we can feel more connected.
Con respecto a las...
With regards to your other novels, in this village of Crosby and Shirley Falls, that are the main towns where all these characters live, from all your novels within this universe, there's a sort of a split that is quite present now in the American society, also in Spain, polarization. And this is also shown in some of the characters, and I'm afraid that some of them will not walk together anymore. So how was it? You already incorporated the pandemics in Lucy by the Sea and O. William, but also here you quote the war in Ukraine and you talk about this political polarization. So why do you think that this is important to be reflected in your writing? This current events. How do you think you want to represent this?
The character interests me the most, but you have character, every person lives in a time and place in history, and that time and place in history helps determine partly who that character is. So I need to, not heavy-handedly I hope, but I need to give a suggestion of the time that they're living in, and the time that these people are living in. Our country is tremendously divided, so I had to put that in there somehow, gently.
Bueno, let's hope that Bob Berger is not right about his fear of a civil war. Algo que también es...
Something that is a recurring topic is the affections, the different ways of displaying this affection. In the case of Lucy Barton, she comes from a family that is an unstructured family with plenty of difficulties, both economic, social. They are marginalized, so to speak, and at the same time this makes her a person who's always looking for this affection. So to what extent affections are central to your literature?
You mean people's affections for each other?
Yeah, love, caring.
Yeah, it's essential to my perception of the world, and therefore it's essential to my work.
And you manage a book which also has a murder mystery, but yet it's a murder mystery that is surrounded by, let's say, more realistic or more down to earth. It's not violent in the way that it's not moved by...
Well, let's just say there's sad stuff in the book, because there's sad stuff in life. But what I'm interested in as a writer is reporting the sad stuff because it's true, but finding those moments of grace that are available to people if they are available to them. I mean, Matt Beach has a terrible situation and he's had a rather sad life, but he is available to the grace that Bob Burgess is able to give him. He's available for that, which is nice.
Y también also, I think, family systems and family relations, how heavily they influence our present, even if there are things that happen in the past, in the remote.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I suspect they do.
But that's something that you elaborate on purpose, or it just so happens that your characters have,
I mean, if you look at Lucy Barton, she's very different from her siblings, and I think that's interesting because I know that siblings are often very different from one another, and she's different from her brother, and her brother's different from her sister, and yet they are united in their background, which is not insignificant. That's just one example. And then you've got Bob and Jim Burgess, and a whole nother problem.
And what about unrecorded lives? That's something that that seems important.
Well, the book is all about unrecorded lives, except they are recorded because I wrote them. But the point is that I think as you read this, would hope that you realize so many lives are unrecorded, and people are just living them every day, and they're living them, I think, with great courage, no matter what may be going on in them. I think that most of us are pretty courageous just to get up every day and continue on, and the fact that their lives are unrecorded does not make them insignificant. I mean, Olive and Lucy talk about all sorts of lives that the people who they're talking about would have been amazed to find out that they were of interest to these people, but they are, because they're people. Does that make sense?
Yes. But Olive sometimes insists that stories need to have a point.
Well, she's Olive. Olive likes to have a point. And when Lucy tells her story, I thought it was sort of funny when Lucy tells her, because Lucy's a writer, and Olive is expecting Lucy to tell her a good story, and Olive's disappointed in the story because she doesn't think it's a very good story. So I thought that was funny.
Yeah, it's also funny that everyone says she doesn't look like the picture in the book.
Yeah.
When they look at Lucy Barton, everybody in town says, she doesn't look like the photograph. That's something.
Well, most people don't.
Well, it's the photographer's fault.
Well, it's just how it is.
Si queréis, como son casi menos.
If you want, it's almost 7:45, and we could maybe open this conversation to the audience, so you can ask questions as well.
In the meantime, I'm going to ask you, le voy a preguntar por sus influencias.
I'm going to ask you about your influences. I have read that you like William Trevor, an Irish writer. I don't know if he's very well known here in Spain. What about Frederick Bush?
I love Frederick Bush. I put together an anthology of his work after he died. And William Trevor, if you haven't read him, you really should, because he's just wonderful. He has such a light touch. And I was I started reading at a very young age, and I was saying earlier that some people that, I read through Hemingway without even knowing who he was, because my grandfather had bought his entire works from traveling salesman, and they were just up on a shelf. And I read through them all at, a rather young age and just was like transfixed. And then I just started to read all. I would take my babysitting money and go to the bookstore and buy paperbacks under the classics section, not knowing what they were, but just buying them and reading all of these, going through the Americans, going through Theodore Dreiser, Sherwood Anderson, Fitzgerald, all the American writers that were there, and then I read the British writers, and then I found the Russians, and that was amazing.
¿Alguien tiene preguntas?
Any questions from the audience?
I'm behind you.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm so excited that you're here.
Thank you.
I've read all your books. I'm just waiting to read Abide With Me. I have a question. Olive Again. In my mind, I read it, or I see it as I'll live again. Is that?
Oh, how interesting.
That's how I see it.
Oh, that's so interesting.
I'll live again.
I'll live again.
Because she's going to live again. And
she's live again.
I just wish that she was a real person. I just want her to be real.
She feels very real to me. I can't believe I've never met her, but she's so real to me. And that's very interesting. I'll live again. I mean, never occurred to me.
There you go.
Thank you.
Look at you, got a nugget. My mom loved your books, and my mom passed away last year.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I had her copy, but I left it I'm from Canada, and I left it there. But thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much. Very much.
Is it on? Yes. So I was wondering, you say you don't plan, but how do you know what the ending is? How do you find the end? Thank you.
I don't plan, and I don't. Very good question, because I don't know. I don't write anything, including a story, from beginning to end. I don't think I've ever done that. So I will write scenes. And I will write a scene that, with one of the characters, I'll think, okay, what is the most pressing thing that I can think of at that moment that this character can go through? And that way, I think I get what I call a heartbeat for the scene, and if it doesn't have a heartbeat, it goes on the floor. But if I have a scene with a heartbeat, it stays on the table, and then other scenes with heartbeats arrange themselves around. And then eventually I realize, okay, now I have to start somewhere and I have to go through this. And then as I go through it, I think, I have no idea how this will end. And this book, I was really getting worried because there was some tension, occurring between a couple of characters. And I thought, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. And then I finally realized, just listen to who they are, and I will learn from them. And Bob Burgess is Bob Burgess. And there you are. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hola, Lucy.
Hi. Hi, Lucy. It's, I love the way you write, although I haven't read all your books. My question is, why did it take you so long to come to Spain? Because every time I go to buy one of your books or to talk with with the shopkeepers in my favorite bookstore, we always end our conversations asking ourselves, why isn't she in Spain?
Because I'm home writing. That's the truth. I've just been writing like nonstop for the last number of years, but that's why. But it's wonderful to be here. It's just absolutely lovely. So thank you so much.
Gracias.
¿Alguien más?
Anybody else has a question?
¿Por aquí?
I see a question up there.
Hola.
Hi, congratulations, and thank you so much for your books. I have read almost all of them. I will right now buy the next one. There's one thing that always caught my attention about them. It's those powerful characters that you describe. In particular, Lucy. How did you end up building this character that is so miserable and at the same time so powerful, so persistent, and that she manages to overcome life? It's a wonderful character.
You know, and thank you. Lucy Barton, that was the strangest. The way characters come to me is very, very mysterious. I mean, Olive just showed up because she's Olive. She just shows up. But Lucy Barton came to me almost like a thread from the ceiling, and I could hear her voice. So I had to write her in first person because her voice is her, whereas Olive is third person because she's big enough to take it. But Lucy is just this wispy little thread that I was trying to catch and hold on to, and I became very attached to her as I realized, wow, look at her, she's gone through so much, and it's obviously affected her, but she's still going on. So I don't know where she came from, but thank you. Sorry, I don't. Thank you so much, though.
¿Alguien más?
Anybody else has a question?
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for your books. You were in Madrid before the pandemic in a reading club, and I was there with my daughter, who was 13 at the time. She had not read your books yet, and we were so excited from that meeting with you. Now she's a bit older. She has read a couple of books of yours. And you are one of the things that I love leaving her as a legacy. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Lovely. Thank you.
Buenas noches.
Good afternoon. I also wanted to join in the congratulations and the joy for having you here. I wanted to talk or ask you about suicides in your books. Suicides as something normal, suicide as a way of avoidance for some of the characters, the presence of the suicides. I like that in your books. What can you tell us a bit? What can you tell us about those things, about suicide?
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. When Kevin Colson comes up on the Maine coast and is thinking about killing himself. Anyway, I read an enormous amount of material about suicides, and I read 3 or 4 books about it. Kay Redfield Jameson, I think is her. Anyway, I read a lot about it, and it was very interesting because, well, there's obviously a wide variety of suicidal thoughts. But anyway, I just became interested in it, and I think that, and I know, and people do die that way, and people do have those thoughts sometimes. And so I just thought, I'm going to write it because it's real. So thank you for not being put off by that. So, but that it's just because it's real, and anybody who has ever known anybody who's died that way, it reverberates forever. You never quite get over a death like that. And it's just so sad, you know, for everybody. So thank you, though.
Si no hay más preguntas, yo quería.
If there are no further questions, you can join in later if you want. But
ideas, some concepts in the novel that I find very, very, well, just very inspiring. The concept of people who are sin eaters.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that?
I don't know where that came from. I just remember as a child hearing about a sin eater, and it came back to me as I was writing about. I thought, well, he's a sin eater if anybody is. I mean, so that concept, which I had somehow heard, I think, in a fairy tale as a kid, just came back to me. And there it is.
Otra cosa, something else another character says is, there are no evil people, there are broken people. Or there's a difference between...
There are evil people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just saying. Right, but most people are broken, and there is a difference between being evil and being broken. And I learned that as I was writing this book, actually. It was very helpful to realize these are just broken people, and many people are broken. Some are more broken than others, but we're all like a little broken, if not major league broken, you know. But that's different from being evil.
Also, there's something that Diane Beach says. Es un personaje de la novela que es una... trabaja en un instituto y es como...
She works, it's a character in the novel, she works in a high school, she's a sort of a guide for students in the high school, and this character says that she has lost motivation for carrying out her job because she has realized that young people see themselves as victims.
Right, and if anybody could see herself as a victim, Diane.
But she is a victim.
Diane is a victim. She really has been a victim, and yet she's obviously not trying to see herself that way. And so the students that nowadays come to her and think that, well, I'm a victim because, you know, this or that, is very hard for her to take. Yeah. And I think, at least in America, I think there's a little bit of a sense of, as anxiety has grown for young people, there's a tremendous anxiety wave through young people in America anyway, and I think that as a result of that, there's a little bit of a sense that they are sort of victimized. And they are, because they're so anxious, but not the way Diana Beach was victimized.
Eso es una gran...
That is a big generational gap.
The way the older characters see themselves and their troubles in life.
Right.
And the way the younger generation sees themselves.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you agree with that?
Yes. That's why I wrote it.
Well, maybe it was, a character's opinion. And not your opinion.
No, it's the book.
También quería preguntarle.
I also wanted to ask you, because I don't know if you've seen the series Olive Kitteridge, and I wanted to know if there will be more adaptations of novels, maybe Lucy Barton's story, or if there's anything in the pipeline that we can expect to see as a TV show.
No. Not in my pipeline.
Pero la serie...
But the series really worked well.
Well, cinematográficamente es...
From a filmmaking perspective, it's a very good piece of work, and it shows many values. Don't you agree with that?
I thought that I was thrilled with that. I was very, very pleased with that. But there's not been any more talk about it, which is fine, because I thought, that was great. I struck gold. And Lucy Barton was a one-woman show with Laura Linney in London, and also on Broadway, and she did that wonderfully. And I just feel like, phew. Oh, so let's not push it.
Muy bien.
Well, it's 8:00. I don't know if you want to ask any more questions, or we can move to the signature of books.
So
yes,
I'd like to thank you for marrying me, and I'd like to thank you for getting me out of the United States during this month. But we've heard a lot about broken people, anxiety, murder, and suicide. Do you think your writing is funny? And can you be funny? And I know the answer, so that's why I thought I'd ask the question.
Well, you're very sweet. I mean, do I think my work is funny? I don't know, but my mother used to read, every book she read, she said, Lizzie, I just howled all the way through that book, meaning she laughed. So she found it funny. She found my work funny.
Claro que tiene humor, yo creo que tiene mucho humor y también eso es...
I think it is funny, and I think that sense of humor is something that you manage very well. These emotional moments and these moving moments and these moments where you need to love with Olive Kitteridge and with other characters as well, with the things that happen to them. I also wanted to ask you about Maine, because Maine, I've been finding out in the internet as well. Maine is the state where she comes from, and it's the universe of Olive Kitteridge's and also Lucy Barton's now. And this is a state that is in the East Coast, but it is the last on top of the country. It's a borderline with Canada. It's a bit bigger than Portugal. Population is about 1,200,000 people. 200,000 people, sorry. And Olive Kitteridge is bothered at some point in the novel when she's talking with Lucy Barton about somebody from Maine, and Olive Kitteridge asks her from what town, and Lucy doesn't know the answer, and she was completely annoyed by this because it was not the same thing to come from this town or the other one. And also the Maine's accent, the way Olive speaks, it's a particular accent. So I would like you to tell us a bit about this so that we have an idea of what Maine represents within the context of the United States, from a cultural viewpoint, social viewpoint, economic. Is it more of a liberal area, more conservative area, more religious?
Liberal. It's both. It's mixed, liberal and conservative. But Maine. I mean, now that you said that about Olive not being irritated because Lucy doesn't know what part of Maine this person came from, it makes me think that's almost like the whole country. Like it represents in some way the whole country, because Olive is so chauvinistic almost about her part of Maine. This is Maine, and if you don't know where somebody comes from in Maine, then you don't really understand Maine. So she loves Maine, loves Maine, loves Maine. You find people like that in Maine. Oy. And it's tired. I mean, for me, it's tiresome. But they're there, and they will get irritated and feel superior to a whole different part of Maine, even though they feel that Maine is the most wonderful place in the whole world. I mean, so in that sense, it represents human nature, I guess is what I'm saying. There's always somebody to feel superior to, no matter what. And Maine is... whatever. As you can tell, I have very mixed feelings about the state of Maine. Ambivalence, I think.
But you can have them because you're from...
I can, because I am from Maine, you're right. Yes.
Bueno, pues si no tenéis nada...
Well, if you don't have any other questions, we will leave some time for her to sign your books.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.